My only daughter said, "The greatest gift for Christmas is if you just died," so I cancelled her inheritance. She shifted in her chair, and I caught sight of the legal papers sticking out of her leather purse. The same purse I'd bought her for her birthday 3 years ago, back when I still believed we were building something together instead of her building something against me. Has someone in your family ever made you question your own worth? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to erase you from your own life, this story will shake you to your core. What I'm about to share happened in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, a place where neighbors wave from their porches and families gather for Sunday dinner. But behind closed doors, the cruelest betrayals happen between people who share the same blood. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you handed them the keys to destroy you? Has someone in your family ever made you question your own worth? Do you know what it feels like when the person who should protect you becomes the one you need protection from? This is the story of a Christmas Eve that changed everything, when a daughter's whispered words revealed a plan so calculated, so heartless, that it would make strangers weep. But here's what she didn't count on: sometimes the quietest people keep the most detailed records. Follow along as we reveal how one man's refusal to be erased became a masterclass in dignity, evidence, and the power of preparation. By the end, you'll understand why the most dangerous weapon isn't anger, it's patience armed with truth. The wrapping paper crinkled between my fingers when she leaned close and whispered, "The greatest gift for Christmas is if you just died." I didn't drop the scissors. I counted the ornaments on the tree. 23. Same as every year since my wife passed. The angel at the top still tilted slightly to the left, the way Margaret always liked it. The house smelled like pine needles and the cinnamon candles my daughter brought, the same ones she'd been bringing for 5 years, like a routine designed to look loving. I kept folding the silver paper around the toy truck for my grandson. My hands didn't shake. They wanted to, but I made them stay steady. Across the kitchen table, she sat watching me with those cold blue eyes she'd inherited from my side of the family. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Did you hear me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I heard her. The words hung in the warm air between us like smoke from a fire you can't put out. But I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for the tape dispenser and sealed the edges of the gift with the same care I'd used to seal 47 years of Christmas mornings in this house. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times. Late for a 68-year-old man on Christmas Eve, but sleep had become difficult since the doctor visit started. Not because I was sick, the tests all came back clean, but because she'd started asking questions about those visits. Questions about my memory. Questions about my ability to handle my own affairs. Questions that now made perfect sense. She shifted in her chair, and I caught sight of the legal papers sticking out of her leather purse. The same purse I'd bought her for her birthday 3 years ago, back when I still believed we were building something together instead of her building something against me. "The utilities are getting expensive," she said, switching tactics like she'd rehearsed this conversation. "Maybe it's time to think about signing them over to someone who can manage them better." I set down the tape and looked at her. Really looked. When had her face become so hard? When had her smile started looking like it was painted on? She was 41 years old, successful, married to a good man who made decent money. But sitting there in my kitchen, surrounded by the Christmas decorations I'd hung alone, she looked hungry in a way that had nothing to do with the dinner cooling on the stove. "I managed them just fine," I said quietly. "Do you?" she asked. "Because Pastor Bill mentioned you seemed confused last Sunday. If your child said this, would you stay silent or speak up? Subscribe, you'll need what happens next." That was when I knew. She'd been laying groundwork, planting seeds of doubt about my competence in the minds of people who cared about me. The pastor. The bank teller who'd started asking if I needed help with simple transactions. The neighbor who'd offered to check my mail when I'd never asked for help. As she walked upstairs to use the bathroom, I noticed more papers in her purse. Papers I'd never seen before, with letterheads I didn't recognize. Pause here. What would you do in this moment? Comment below. The house felt different after she left that night. Colder. Like someone had been taking measurements while I wasn't looking. The coffee went cold while I stared at her empty chair. The house felt different, like someone had been taking measurements while I wasn't looking. Christmas morning came gray and quiet. No phone calls. No visits. The presents I'd wrapped sat under the tree like evidence of a celebration that never happened. I left them there and walked to my study instead, where I kept the important papers in the old oak desk my father had built. The top drawer slid open with its familiar squeak. Insurance policies, birth certificates, the deed to the farm, everything had its place in manila folders labeled in my careful handwriting. Everything except the deed to this house. I checked twice. Then 3 times. The folder marked property deeds sat exactly where it always did, but it was lighter now. Thinner. The deed to the rental property on Elm Street was there. The farm deed was there. But the house deed, the most important one, worth more than both properties combined, was gone. My hands trembled as I pulled out every folder, checking behind tabs and inside covers. Nothing. I sat back in the leather chair that had been my reading spot for 20 years and tried to remember the last time I'd seen that document. Last month, maybe, when I'd updated my insurance. I'd put it right back where it belonged. Someone else had been in this drawer. The floorboard outside the study creaked the way it always did when someone walked to the kitchen. But the house was empty. Had been empty since she left last night with her designer purse full of papers I couldn't identify. The sound came from the wood settling, nothing more. But it reminded me of all the times she'd visited in the past year, always asking to use the bathroom upstairs, always taking longer than necessary. I walked through each room like a detective in my own home. The living room looked normal, but the photo of Margaret on the mantel had been moved slightly. The kitchen was clean, but one of the chairs was pulled out farther than I'd left it. Small changes. The kind you'd only notice if you knew your own space the way a blind man knows his furniture. In the bedroom, I opened the jewelry box where Margaret kept her wedding ring after the arthritis made it too painful to wear. The ring was there, but the small velvet pouch beside it was gone. The one that held the spare key to my safe deposit box. I sat on the bed and tried to think clearly. How long had this been going on? Months? Years? How many times had she been alone in this house, going through my things with the careful attention of someone building a case? The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Merry Christmas, Tom. Pastor Bill's voice sounded tired. I wanted to check on you. Your daughter called this morning. She seemed worried about you spending Christmas alone. She seemed worried. After telling me my death would be the greatest Christmas gift. After taking papers from my desk and keys from my wife's jewelry box. I'm fine, Bill. Thank you for calling. Ever noticed something missing and felt your stomach drop? But I wasn't fine. And for the first time in my 68 years, I wondered if being fine was something I could afford anymore. Pastor Bill didn't look up from his coffee when he said, Tom, she's been asking questions about your memory. The spoon clinked against the mug like a timer counting down. We sat in Miller's Diner on Main Street, the same booth where Margaret and I used to have breakfast after Sunday service. The red vinyl seats were cracked now, patched with silver tape, but the coffee was still strong and the pancakes still came with real butter. Normal things in a week that had stopped feeling normal. Bill stirred his coffee slowly, like he was buying time to find the right words. He'd been our pastor for 15 years, had buried Margaret, had listened to my doubts and fears in the months after her funeral. He knew me well enough to know when something was wrong. What kind of questions? I asked. Careful ones, he said, finally looking up. His gray eyes held the kind of concern that comes from watching families tear themselves apart from the inside. She asked if you'd been repeating yourself during conversations. Whether you seemed confused about dates or appointments. If anyone had noticed you forgetting names. I set my coffee cup down harder than I meant to. The sound echoed through the half-empty diner, where 3 farmers argued about corn prices and a young mother tried to keep her toddler from throwing hash browns on the floor. And what did you tell her? The truth, Bill said. That you're sharper than most men half your age. That you remember scripture better than I do. That you balance the church books without making a single error. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by anger. She'd been working the congregation like a politician running for office, except the office she wanted was control of my life. But Tom, Bill continued, leaning forward, she didn't seem satisfied with those answers. She kept pressing. Said she was concerned about you living alone in that big house. Mentioned that you'd been having trouble with bills. What bills? That's what I asked her. Because your tithe comes in every month, same amount, same date. Automatic transfer from your checking account. Has for years. The pieces clicked together like tumblers in a lock. She wasn't just questioning my memory, she was creating a narrative. Building a story about a confused old man who couldn't manage his own affairs. A man who needed someone responsible to step in and help. She asked if you'd been forgetting to pay utilities, Bill said. But Tom, your utilities are automatic. Have been for years. The diner suddenly felt too warm. Outside the window, snow had started falling, dusting the parked cars and empty sidewalks of our small town. Christmas decorations hung from every lamppost, cheerful and bright. But inside this booth, the world felt darker. There's something else, Bill said quietly. She asked about your will. Whether you'd mentioned updating it. Whether you'd talked about what would happen to the house and the farm if something happened to you. When trust breaks this quietly, you miss the warning signs. Subscribe to catch what I missed. I thought about the missing deed, the stolen key, the papers in her purse. How long had she been planning this? How many people had she talked to, planting seeds of doubt about my competence while positioning herself as the concerned daughter? Bill, I said, I need the name of a good lawyer. He didn't ask why. He just pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Red flag or misunderstanding? What's your gut saying? Sometimes the best pastors know when prayer isn't enough. Sometimes you need someone who understands the law better than they understand grace. The bank teller's face changed when I asked for my records. She looked over my shoulder twice before sliding the folder across the marble counter. First National had been my bank for 32 years. I'd gotten my first mortgage here, opened my business account here, set up the automatic payments that kept my life running smoothly. The building still smelled like old money and floor polish, still had the same heavy wooden chairs in the waiting area where farmers counted 20s and young couples applied for their first loans. But today, something felt off. Is there a problem, Mr. Morrison? Asked Janet, the head teller who'd helped me through Margaret's final medical bills. She was a good woman, efficient and kind, with grown children of her own and a husband who coached Little League baseball. I just need to see who's been requesting information about my accounts, I said. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to something closer to concern. Let me get the manager, she said quietly. David Chen had been managing this branch for 8 years. We'd served on the church finance committee together, had discussed investment strategies over coffee and handshakes. He was younger than me by 20 years but older than my daughter by 10, right in that sweet spot where experience meets energy. Tom, he said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Janet says you have questions about account inquiries. Someone's been asking about my finances, I said. I need to know who and when. He pulled up my account on his computer screen, fingers moving across the keyboard with the practiced speed of someone who'd spent years translating money into data. His brow furrowed as he scrolled through screens I couldn't see. There have been 3 inquiries in the past 6 months, he said slowly. All from the same person. All requesting the same type of information. What type? Balance history. Transaction patterns. Bill payment schedules. The kind of information someone would need to. He paused, choosing his words carefully. To establish your financial habits and competency. My chest tightened. Who requested it? David turned his monitor so I could see the screen. There, in neat digital text, was my daughter's name. 3 separate dates, August 15th, October 3rd, and November 18th. The most recent inquiry had been just 5 days before Christmas. She said she was helping you organize your finances, David explained. Said you'd asked her to look into setting up some assisted management services. I'd never asked for help. Had never even mentioned having trouble with money, because I wasn't having trouble. My finances ran like clockwork, had for decades. Every bill paid on time, every account balanced to the penny. What did you tell her? The truth. That your accounts are in excellent order. That you maintain substantial balances in both checking and savings. That you've never missed a payment or shown any signs of financial distress. The signature on the information request wasn't mine. But it looked close enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. Screenshot that detail in your mind. You'll see why later. David, I said, I need copies of everything. Every inquiry, every response, every piece of paper with her name on it. He nodded grimly. I'll have them ready by tomorrow morning. As I walked out of the bank, the weight of the folder in my hand felt like evidence in a case I was just beginning to understand. Mary Henderson had been notarizing documents in this town for 37 years. Her hands shook when she saw the papers I brought. Her office sat above Henderson Hardware, reached by a narrow staircase that creaked under your feet and walls lined with certificates that tracked her career from young secretary to respected public official. The smell of wood stain drifted up from the store below, mixing with the scent of old paper and ink that filled every corner of her small workspace. Mary had notarized my mortgage, my business incorporation papers, Margaret's will. She'd watched our town grow from a farming community to a suburb, had put her official stamp on births, deaths, marriages, and divorces. If anyone understood the power of documents, it was Mary Henderson. I'd been expecting you, she said quietly, not looking up from the papers I'd spread across her desk. Bank records. Account inquiries. The evidence I'd been gathering piece by piece. Expecting me? She finally met my eyes, and I saw something I'd never seen in Mary before, fear. She came to see me 6 times over the past 4 months. Your daughter. Said you were having memory problems. Said you were too tired to come in yourself for document signings. The small office suddenly felt smaller. Outside the window, Main Street looked normal. Cars parked at angles, people walking with shopping bags, kids throwing snowballs in the park. But inside this room, the foundation of my life was shifting. What documents? Mary opened her desk drawer with trembling fingers and pulled out a manila envelope. She brought practice sheets. Pages with your signature repeated over and over. Said you'd been working on keeping your handwriting steady despite the tremors. I looked at my hands. Steady as they'd always been. No tremors, no shaking, no signs of the aging she'd invented to justify her story. She said the doctor recommended you practice signing important papers at home, then bring them here for notarization. Said it would be easier on you than making multiple trips to my office. The envelope contained photocopies of signature pages. My name written dozens of times in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't quite right. Too careful in some places, too loose in others. Like someone had been studying my signatures and trying to perfect their forgery. I should have called you, Mary said, tears gathering in her eyes. But she seemed so concerned, so loving. She talked about how hard it was to watch her father struggle. How she just wanted to help you maintain your dignity while managing your affairs. What papers did you notarize? None yet, Mary said quickly. She kept saying you weren't ready, that you needed more practice. But she wanted me to prepare blank templates for estate documents. Power of attorney forms. Asset transfer papers. The room spun slightly. Blank templates, pre-notarized, waiting for forged signatures. A system designed to transfer my property without my knowledge or consent. She brought your signature 6 times, Mary whispered. Said you were too tired to come in yourself. 6 attempts. What was she planning that needed 6 tries? Mary reached into another drawer and pulled out a small digital camera. I photograph every document I notarize. For my records. I have pictures of every practice sheet she brought. Evidence. Timestamps. Proof of attempted fraud stretching back 4 months. Mary, I said, I'm going to need copies of everything. She nodded, already reaching for her printer. Tom, I'm so sorry. I never should have. You couldn't have known, I said. But now we both do. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and old secrets. James Crawford spread my documents across his desk like a crime scene investigator. I'd driven the 43 miles to Dayton because Pastor Bill said Crawford handled farm disputes and family fights. The kind where blood relatives try to steal what you spend a lifetime building. I walked in with a manila folder thick with Mary Henderson's confessions, bank records, and that forged will I'd found behind my tax returns. Crawford was maybe 60, with gray hair and reading glasses that made him look like a college professor. He didn't rush me through the story. Didn't check his watch when I explained about Christmas Eve, about my daughter's whispered cruelty, about finding papers I'd never signed. Mrs. Morrison, he said, pulling out a magnifying glass like something from a detective movie. This signature analysis alone shows clear forgery. See how the T in Tom slopes differently? Your natural hand goes up. This one goes down. He lined up 3 signatures side by side. Mine from the bank, the fake one from the will, and another fake one from some insurance form I'd never filled out. The differences jumped out like lies in daylight. She's been practicing, I said. More than practicing. She's been building a case for incompetence. Look at these dates. He pointed to timestamps on medical reports. All from the same week you were supposedly having memory problems. But Mrs. Morrison, you drove here today without GPS. You remembered my secretary's name from one phone call. You brought every document I requested, in chronological order. The relief hit me like warm coffee on a cold morning. Someone finally believed me. Crawford opened a thick legal book and showed me pages about elder fraud. In Ohio, what your daughter attempted carries serious penalties. Forgery, attempted theft by deception, abuse of an elderly person. We're not talking about family disagreements anymore. This is criminal. Without this next move, everything could have been lost. Subscribe to see the strategy. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. First, we file an emergency protective order to freeze any changes to your estate. Second, we document every fraudulent signature with a handwriting expert. Third, we trace every fake medical report back to its source. What if she fights back? She will. But Mrs. Morrison, you have something she doesn't. Crawford tapped the stack of evidence. The truth. And in my experience, the truth has a way of standing up in court, even when family members don't. He walked me through the paperwork. Forms to protect my assets, forms to challenge the fake will, forms to demand answers about those medical reports from doctors I'd never met. Each signature felt like taking back control of my own life. We need to file an emergency protective order, Crawford said, looking at his calendar. She's moved faster than you realized. The pen felt solid in my hand when I signed the real papers. Not like those shaky forgeries my daughter had been practicing. This was my handwriting, my decision, my fight. Crawford sealed everything in a legal envelope. Judge Hawkins handles estate disputes. She doesn't tolerate fraud, especially against elderly parents. We'll have answers by Friday. I walked out of that office feeling taller than I had in months. I found it behind my tax returns, where I kept things I didn't want to lose. A will I'd never written, with my signature I'd never signed. The house felt different when I got home from Crawford's office. Like someone had been moving through my private spaces, touching things that weren't theirs to touch. I went straight to my study, pulled out the metal filing cabinet, and started checking every folder. That's when I saw the corner of cream-colored paper sticking out from behind my 2019 tax documents. Legal-sized paper, folded neat and official-looking. I'd never put anything there. My hands were steady when I pulled it out. Steadier than they'd been in weeks. The header read, Last Will and Testament of Thomas Edward Morrison. Dated 3 months ago, during what my daughter had been calling my bad spell. I read every line twice. According to this document, I was leaving everything to my devoted daughter, who had cared for me through my declining mental health. The farmhouse, the rental property, my savings, even my pickup truck. Everything I'd worked for since I was 18 years old. The signature at the bottom looked like mine. Close enough to fool a bank teller who didn't know better. But I knew my own handwriting. I'd been signing my name for 74 years. This wasn't it. The witnesses were listed as neighbors who've known Tom for years. Margaret Sewell from Maple Street and Robert Chen from Elm Avenue. I'd lived in this town for 32 years. I'd never heard either name before in my life. I sat in my leather chair, the one my wife picked out before she got sick, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just about money. My daughter had tried to erase me while I was still breathing. The notary stamp looked official. Maria Santos, commission number 47392. But Mary Henderson was the only notary I'd ever used, and her name was Mary, not Maria. I made a note to check if Maria Santos even existed. There were other papers in that same spot. Forms requesting my medical records from doctors in Columbus and Cleveland. Applications for disability benefits I'd never needed. Even a typed note about my increasing confusion and memory loss, with observations dated back 6 months. Each page felt like evidence of a different version of my life. One where I was weak, confused, dependent. One where my daughter was the responsible caretaker making difficult decisions for a failing old man. But I wasn't failing. My mind was sharp enough to catch every lie she'd built around me. I photographed every page with my phone, the way Crawford had shown me. Then I put the fake will back exactly where I'd found it. Let her think I hadn't discovered it yet. The phone rang while I was closing the filing cabinet. Unknown number from Cleveland. Mr. Morrison? This is Dr. Patricia Wells from Cleveland General. I understand you've been having some cognitive concerns. I'd like to schedule a follow-up examination. Ma'am, I've never been to Cleveland General in my life. Long pause. Sir, I have your file right here. We discussed your memory problems last month. No ma'am, we didn't. 2 fake witnesses. How deep does this deception go? Another doctor who'd never examined me, calling to schedule appointments I'd never made. Judge Patricia Hawkins read the petition without expression. When she looked up, her eyes had the hardness of someone who'd seen this before. The Franklin County Courthouse smelled like floor wax and nervous sweat. I sat in the front row with Crawford, watching other people's family disasters get sorted out by strangers in black robes. Divorce papers, custody battles, property disputes. All the ways people hurt each other when love turns to legal warfare. Our case got called at 2:15 p.m. Morrison vs. Morrison, Emergency Protective Order for Estate Assets. Judge Hawkins was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with short gray hair and no-nonsense glasses. She'd already read Crawford's filing, all 17 pages of evidence we'd put together over the past 3 days. Mr. Crawford, this is highly unusual. You're alleging systematic fraud by the petitioner's own daughter? Yes, Your Honor. We have documented forgery, fictitious medical reports, and attempted theft of estate assets through fraudulent documentation. Crawford spread our evidence across the plaintiff's table like a poker hand he knew would win. The fake will, the signature comparisons, Mary Henderson's sworn statement about the pre-signed documents, and printouts from my phone showing calls from doctors I'd never met. Judge Hawkins picked up the signature analysis first. Even from the gallery, I could see her eyebrows raise when she compared the real signatures with the fakes. Mr. Morrison, how old are you? 74, Your Honor. And you drove yourself here today? Yes, ma'am. Same truck I've been driving for 12 years. Have you been diagnosed with any cognitive impairment, dementia, or memory issues? No, ma'am. My doctor is Sarah Kim at Columbus Family Practice. She can confirm I've passed every cognitive test she's given me. Judge Hawkins made notes on a yellow pad. Mr. Crawford, you're requesting a complete freeze on all estate-related transactions? Yes, Your Honor. Until we can determine the extent of the fraudulent documentation and identify all parties involved in this scheme. The law stepped in. But what happens when she finds out? She flipped through the medical reports that had my name on them but weren't about me. Reports claiming I'd been examined for memory loss, confusion, and inability to manage my own affairs. All signed by doctors in Cleveland and Cincinnati, cities I rarely visited. These medical evaluations. Judge Hawkins looked directly at me. Mr. Morrison, have you ever been examined by Dr. Patricia Wells at Cleveland General? No, Your Honor. I called her office after she contacted me. She admitted she'd never seen me before but said someone had sent her my information requesting a consultation. NDR. Michael Rodriguez in Cincinnati? Never heard of him until I saw his name on these reports, Your Honor. Judge Hawkins set down the papers and looked at Crawford. This appears to be a clear case of elder fraud and document forgery. I'm granting the emergency protective order. The relief hit me like sitting down after standing too long. Granted, the judge said. And I'm ordering a forensic review of all recent estate documents bearing Mr. Morrison's signature. Nothing gets changed, transferred, or executed until this investigation is complete. Crawford squeezed my shoulder as we packed up the papers. Outside in the courthouse parking lot, I felt like I could breathe again. But my phone was already ringing. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Her voice was different, controlled, lawyer-coached. Dad, we need to talk about these misunderstandings. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen, watching the sun come up over the back pasture, when she called. 3 days had passed since Judge Hawkins granted the protective order. 3 peaceful days without worrying about what papers might go missing or what signatures might get forged while I slept. What misunderstandings? I asked. This whole legal thing. Dad, I'm concerned about you. Pastor Bill called me yesterday. He said you've been telling people I tried to steal from you. Her tone was soft, reasonable. Like she was talking to a child who'd gotten confused about something simple. But I'd heard this voice before, back when she was 16 and got caught sneaking out. Sweet and innocent on the surface, calculating underneath. I didn't tell Pastor Bill anything that wasn't true. Dad, you're 74. Sometimes memory gets fuzzy. Sometimes we think things happened that didn't really happen. It's not your fault. There it was. The same strategy she'd been building with those fake medical reports. Make me sound confused, make herself sound like the responsible daughter dealing with an elderly father's declining mind. My memory's fine. Fine enough to remember finding that I never signed. Long pause. When she spoke again, the sweetness was gone. Dad, I've been talking to some people. Medical professionals. They're concerned about your recent behavior. Driving to Dayton alone, hiring lawyers to fight your own family, making accusations about documents you probably just forgot signing. I didn't forget signing anything because I never signed it. That's exactly what worries them, Dad. The certainty. The paranoia. Dr. Wells from Cleveland General is very concerned about your cognitive state. Dr. Wells. The same doctor who'd called me for an appointment I'd never made, for an examination that never happened. This threat ruins families quietly. Subscribe to see how he fights back. How do you know Dr. Wells? Another pause. Shorter this time. I called her after you seemed confused about your appointment. She explained that memory problems often start with denial. Patients forget appointments, then insist they never made them. The lie was smooth, practiced. But she'd made a mistake. Dr. Wells had admitted to me that she'd never examined me, that someone else had sent her my information. Now my daughter was claiming she'd called Dr. Wells after I missed an appointment that never existed. What appointment? Dad, this is what I mean. You're getting agitated over simple questions. Dr. Wells says that's a common symptom. I walked to my study while she talked, pulled out the notebook where I'd been writing down dates and phone calls. Everything Crawford had taught me about building a case. I want to help you, Dad. But you need to let me. You need to trust that sometimes other people can see things you can't see. Like what? Like the fact that you're not thinking clearly. Like the fact that you need someone to look after your affairs before you make mistakes that can't be fixed. The script was perfect. Caring daughter, declining father, difficult decisions made out of love and necessity. The competency hearing is Thursday, she said. I have 3 doctors who've reviewed your recent behavior. The line went dead before I could respond. 3 doctors who'd never examined him. How is this legal? I sat in my study, looking at my notes, and realized the war had just officially started. Dr. Patricia Wells looked at the chart with my name on it, then looked at me. Mr. Morrison, I've never examined you in my life. Crawford had suggested we visit the doctors listed on those fake medical reports. Start with Dr. Wells in Cleveland since she was the one who'd called me about the non-existent appointment. The drive took an hour and 20 minutes, but I needed to see her face when I showed up. Cleveland General was bigger than I expected. All glass and steel, with parking that cost more than dinner. Dr. Wells' office was on the 7th floor, neurology department. Her secretary looked confused when I walked in without an appointment, asking to speak with the doctor about my medical file. Mr. Morrison? You're supposed to be here Thursday for your follow-up. Ma'am, I've never been here before. That's what I need to discuss with Dr. Wells. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from a woman in a white coat who looked genuinely puzzled. Dr. Wells was maybe 40, with kind eyes and the sort of careful way of speaking that comes from delivering bad news to families. This is very strange, she said, flipping through a manila folder. I have a complete file here. Initial consultation notes, cognitive assessment scores, even a brain scan order. All dated 3 weeks ago. She showed me the paperwork. My name, my address, my date of birth. Notes about memory problems, confusion, difficulty managing finances. A recommendation for immediate family intervention. But I was never here 3 weeks ago. Mr. Morrison, I wrote these notes myself. Look, here's my handwriting. She pointed to comments in the margins. Patient presented with moderate cognitive decline. Recommend family assistance with legal and financial decisions. Ma'am, I understand this is confusing, but I've never set foot in this building before today. Dr. Wells pulled out a calendar and checked the date on the consultation notes. September 15th, 2:30 p.m. You were my last appointment that day. September 15th I was at my nephew's wedding in Toledo. I have pictures. She stared at the file, then at me, then back at the file. This doesn't make sense. I remember writing these notes. I remember the consultation. What did this patient look like? Well, you. Dr. Wells stopped talking. Her face went pale. Oh my God. She buzzed her secretary. Linda, can you pull the sign-in sheet for September 15th? I need to see who was here for the 2:30 appointment. 5 minutes later, Linda came back with a clipboard. Dr. Wells ran her finger down the list of names and stopped. Thomas Morrison, 2:30 p.m. But the signature. She held it up next to the consent forms in my file. These don't match. Not only did I not examine you, Dr. Wells said, studying the signatures closer, but my signature on this report? That's not how I sign my name. She pulled out a prescription pad and signed her name. Patricia M. Wells, with a distinctive loop on the P and a flourish under her last name. The signature on my fake medical report was printed, careful, nothing like her natural handwriting. Someone forged your signature too. Someone brought me a patient claiming to be you, got me to write a real evaluation, then somehow copied my signature onto a fake report with your actual information. Forged medical reports. How many laws has she broken? 2 down, 1 to go. Time to drive to Cincinnati. She walked into the courtroom wearing black, like she was already attending my funeral. Her lawyer carried 3 folders. I carried one, but mine had timestamps. The Franklin County Courthouse felt smaller on competency hearing day. Judge Hawkins called the session to order at 9 a.m. sharp, and my daughter's attorney stood up first. Richard Coleman was one of those lawyers who wore expensive suits and spoke in paragraphs, like every sentence was being recorded for history. Your Honor, we're here because Mr. Morrison's family is deeply concerned about his declining mental state. We have medical evaluations from 3 separate physicians documenting significant cognitive impairment. Crawford and I had spent the weekend preparing for this. We knew Coleman would lead with the fake medical reports, so we brought our own evidence. Real evidence. Mr. Coleman, Judge Hawkins said, please present your medical witnesses for cross-examination. Coleman's confidence flickered like a light bulb with loose wiring. Your Honor, Dr. Patricia Wells from Cleveland General was unable to appear due to scheduling conflicts. Dr. Michael Rodriguez from Cincinnati had a family emergency. Dr. Sarah Chen from Toledo sends her regrets. 3 no-shows. What does that tell you about her case? Judge Hawkins looked over her reading glasses. All 3 medical witnesses are absent? That's highly unusual for a competency hearing. Yes, Your Honor, but we have their written reports. Crawford stood up like he'd been waiting for this moment since law school. Your Honor, we'd like to present counter-evidence regarding these medical evaluations. He opened our folder and pulled out the real story. Photos of me at my nephew's wedding on September 15th, the same day Dr. Wells claimed she'd examined me. Bank records showing I'd driven to Toledo and back without assistance. Even a receipt from the gas station where I'd stopped for coffee. Dr. Wells confirmed to Mr. Morrison personally that she never examined him, Crawford said. In fact, she has no record of ever treating anyone named Thomas Morrison. My daughter shifted in her chair. The black dress suddenly looked less like funeral attire and more like something you'd wear to court when you knew you were losing. Coleman tried to recover. Your Honor, the pattern of confusion and memory loss is well documented. Mr. Morrison's own daughter has observed significant decline in his ability to manage daily affairs. What daily affairs? Crawford asked, pulling out my bank statements. Your Honor, Mr. Morrison's finances are in perfect order. His bills are paid automatically, his accounts balanced to the penny. He drove himself to this hearing without assistance. Judge Hawkins reviewed the evidence page by page. The fake signatures, the forged medical reports, the timeline showing I'd been in completely different places when these alleged examinations occurred. Mr. Coleman, these medical reports appear to contain significant irregularities. The signatures don't match the physician's actual handwriting, and the dates conflict with verified evidence of Mr. Morrison's activities. My daughter leaned forward and whispered something urgent to Coleman. He nodded and stood again. Your Honor, even if there are questions about specific documentation, the underlying concern remains valid. Mr. Morrison's family believes he needs assistance managing his affairs. Mr. Morrison, Judge Hawkins said, looking directly at me. You've listened to these proceedings. How do you respond? I stood up slowly, the way I'd been standing up for 74 years. Your Honor, I understand my daughter's concerns. But I've never needed help managing my affairs. I've never been examined by these doctors. And I never signed any document giving anyone permission to make decisions for me. When the judge asked for her medical witnesses, the courtroom went silent. None of them showed up. The gavel came down like the period at the end of a very long sentence. Judge Hawkins didn't raise her voice when she said, fraud. She didn't need to. The word landed like a judge's gavel in the silent courtroom. After reviewing all evidence presented today, this court finds no credible medical basis for a competency determination. However, the evidence does reveal what appears to be systematic fraud and attempted elder abuse. The courtroom felt like church during prayer, everyone holding their breath, waiting for what came next. My daughter sat perfectly still in her black dress, but I could see her hands shaking in her lap. Judge Hawkins continued reading from her notes. The medical reports presented contained forged signatures from physicians who never examined the respondent. The dates cited conflict with verified evidence of Mr. Morrison's activities. The handwriting analysis shows clear attempts at document forgery. Coleman tried one last time. Your Honor, we respectfully request. Mr. Coleman, your client attempted to defraud this court with fabricated medical evidence. I'm referring this matter to the prosecutor's office for criminal investigation. The words hung in the air like smoke. Criminal investigation. Elder fraud. Attempted theft by deception. All the things Crawford had warned me about, now official court findings. Furthermore, Judge Hawkins said, I'm issuing a permanent protective order preventing any changes to Mr. Morrison's estate without his explicit written consent, verified by independent legal counsel. My daughter finally looked at me then. Not with the fake concern she'd been showing Coleman, but with something colder. Like she was calculating whether this was really over or just the end of round one. The competency petition is denied in its entirety. Mr. Morrison is found to be of sound mind and fully capable of managing his own affairs. Justice moves slowly until it doesn't. Subscribe to see what he does next. The gavel came down, and people started moving like a spell had been broken. Crawford packed up our evidence with the satisfied efficiency of a carpenter putting away tools after finishing a good job. Tom, he said quietly, this is just the beginning. The prosecutor will want to interview you about the forged documents. And she'll probably appeal. I watched my daughter gather her purse, the same leather purse where I'd first seen those legal papers on Christmas Eve. Coleman was already heading for the exit, probably calculating how much distance he could put between himself and a case built on lies. As court adjourned, she turned to me and mouthed, "This isn't over." But her lawyer was already packing up. Empty threat or real danger? What's your read? Outside the courthouse, the April sun felt warmer than it had in months. Crawford walked me to my truck, and for the first time since Christmas, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to my boots. What happens now? I asked. Now you go home and live your life, he said. And if anyone asks you to sign anything, you call me first. I drove home through town, past the bank where Janet had helped me gather evidence, past the diner where Pastor Bill had given me his warning, past Henderson Hardware where Mary had confessed to being pressured into fraud. The truck radio was playing old country music, and for the first time in months, I turned up the volume and sang along. The pen felt heavier than it should have when I signed my real will. This time, I chose witnesses who actually knew me. Crawford's office had become familiar over the past few weeks. Same leather chairs, same law books, same coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since morning. But today felt different. Today I wasn't just fighting to keep what was mine. I was deciding what to do with it. Take your time, Tom, Crawford said. This document will stand for years. Make sure it says what you really want. I'd been thinking about that ever since the court hearing. What did I really want? Not revenge, despite everything she'd put me through. Not punishment, though the criminal investigation would handle that part. I wanted my legacy to mean something more than just another family torn apart by greed. Pastor Bill sat in one of the witness chairs, reading through the document with the careful attention he brought to Scripture. Tom, this is generous. Are you sure? Mary Henderson occupied the other witness chair, her notary stamp ready for legitimate use this time. She'd been quiet since the hearing, carrying guilt about being fooled by my daughter's scheme. Today was her chance to be part of the solution. The will was simple, the way I'd wanted my life to be. The farm would go to my nephew David, who'd actually worked the land and understood its value. The rental property would be sold, with proceeds going to the church's emergency fund for families in crisis. My savings would establish a scholarship at the community college for students studying agriculture. And my daughter? I left her something she'd never expect. The family Bible? Pastor Bill asked, reviewing that section. With a letter inside? She'll have to read it to understand, I said. Maybe it'll remind her of who she used to be. What would you put in that letter? Forgiveness or final words? Crawford reviewed each page one more time. This is ironclad, Tom. No one can challenge your mental competency after the court's findings. No one can claim undue influence with Pastor Bill and Mary as witnesses. I signed my name with the same steady hand I'd been using for 74 years. Not the shaky forgery my daughter had been practicing, but my real signature. The one that belonged on documents I'd actually read and understood. Pastor Bill signed next, his handwriting neat and careful. Then Mary, whose signature had been used to authenticate so many important moments in our town's history. Births, deaths, property transfers, business deals. Now it was protecting the most important transfer of all, from my life to whatever came after. There's one more thing, Crawford said, pulling out an additional document. A living will and healthcare directive. After what she attempted, you need to specify who makes medical decisions if you're ever unable to. I named Pastor Bill as my healthcare proxy, with Mary as the backup. People who knew me, who'd proven their trustworthiness when it mattered most. The notary stamp came down with a solid thunk, making everything official. Mary's hands didn't shake this time. She knew these signatures were real, these witnesses authentic, these intentions clear. I left her one thing. The family Bible, with a letter tucked inside. She'd have to read it to understand. Outside Crawford's office, the spring afternoon felt like new beginnings. The legal papers were filed, the protection complete, the future secure. Whatever happened next, it would happen on my terms. Word travels fast in a small town. By Sunday, half the congregation knew what she'd tried to do. The other half pretended they didn't. First Baptist looked the same as always, white clapboard siding, red doors, the steeple bell that had been calling people to worship for 87 years. But walking up those front steps felt different now. Like I was returning from a war that most people had only heard about in rumors. Pastor Bill greeted everyone at the door, same as always. But when he shook my hand, he held it a second longer than usual. Good to see you, Tom. How are you holding up? Better, I said. Much better. Inside, the sanctuary buzzed with the quiet conversations that happened before service started. I took my usual pew, third row from the back on the left side, where Margaret and I had sat for 23 years. Where I'd sat alone for the past 5. Janet from the bank nodded from across the aisle. Her smile looked relieved, like she'd been carrying worry about whether I'd be okay. Behind her, David Shen sat with his family, the same man who'd helped me gather evidence of my daughter's financial inquiries. The service proceeded normally. Opening hymn, prayer, scripture reading, sermon about forgiveness and justice working together. Pastor Bill had a way of preaching that felt like conversation, like he was talking directly to each person about exactly what they needed to hear. After the closing benediction, people moved toward the fellowship hall for coffee and cookies. That's when the real conversations happened. Tom, said Mrs. Patterson, who'd taught Sunday school for 40 years. I want you to know how sorry I am. If I'd known what she was really asking about when she questioned your memory. You couldn't have known, Eleanor. She was careful about how she presented things. More people approached throughout the coffee hour. Not with pity or curiosity, but with the quiet support that small communities offer when one of their own faces trouble. Offers to help with grocery shopping, invitations to dinner, assurances that if I ever needed anything, I just had to call. Mary Henderson found me by the coffee pot. Tom, I need to tell you something. She came by yesterday, after the hearing. My stomach tightened. What did she want? Mary pressed a folded note into my hand. She asked for one more favor. Said she needed to explain her side of the story to someone who understood legal documents. She's still trying. What could she want now? I unfolded the note in my truck after leaving church. It was written in my daughter's careful handwriting, the same handwriting she'd used to practice forging my signature. Mary, I know you think badly of me now. But everything I did was out of love for my father. He's getting older and I was trying to protect him from making mistakes. If you could just call me, I can explain how this all got misunderstood. The manipulation was still there, smooth as always. Still positioning herself as the concerned daughter, still claiming good intentions, still trying to find someone who might believe her version of events. I folded the note and put it in my wallet next to the court order that protected my assets. Evidence that even after losing in court, even after being exposed as a fraud, she wasn't done. But I was done with her. This Christmas Eve, I wrapped gifts for the grandkids again. But this time, I locked the legal papers in the safe. Some lessons cost too much to forget. The same kitchen table where she'd whispered her cruel words a year ago now held presents wrapped in bright paper and tied with real ribbon. The same ornaments hung on the tree, including the tilted angel Margaret had loved. But everything felt different now. Safer. More honest. David's family would be here in an hour. My nephew had grown into the kind of man who kept his word and showed up when he said he would. His children, my great-niece and great-nephew, would fill this old house with the sound of Christmas morning again. I'd gotten the boy a toy truck, same kind I'd been wrapping that terrible night. The girl got art supplies and a journal for writing stories. Real stories, not the fictional narratives their cousin had tried to build around my life. The phone hadn't rung from her since the trial ended. The prosecutor had filed charges for elder fraud and document forgery. Her lawyer had negotiated a plea agreement that included restitution and community service, but no jail time. Justice served, though not as thoroughly as Crawford had hoped. The family Bible sat on the mantel where it belonged. I'd written the letter and tucked it inside the front cover, next to the family tree that traced our lineage back 4 generations. If she ever came to claim her inheritance, she'd find words about forgiveness and disappointment, about second chances and burned bridges, about loving someone who tried to erase you from your own life. But I wasn't holding my breath. The grandfather clock chimed 5 times. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the bare branches and covering the pasture where I'd learned to work as a boy. The same land that would pass to David when my time came, free from legal challenges and fraudulent claims. My will rested in the safe beside other important documents. Real documents, signed by my own hand, witnessed by people who knew me and cared about my actual well-being. The prosecutor had kept copies of all the forged papers as evidence, so they couldn't disappear or be altered again. Crawford had called last week to check on me. The criminal case was closed, the protective orders remained in place, and my estate planning was solid enough to survive any future challenges. "You did the right thing, Tom," he'd said. "Standing up to family takes courage most people don't have." Maybe. Or maybe I'd just gotten tired of being treated like I was already dead. The headlights in my driveway announced David's arrival. Car doors slammed, children's voices carried on the cold air, footsteps hurried toward the warmth of the house. Real family, the kind that showed up because they wanted to be here, not because they were measuring the value of what you'd leave behind. I opened the door before they could knock. David carried a casserole dish that smelled like home. His wife held a plate of cookies. The kids bounced with Christmas energy, eager to see what waited under the tree. "Grandpa Tom," they shouted, using the honorary title that meant more than blood relation ever could. The tree lights reflected off the safe's metal door. Inside, the Rayal waited, signed by people who actually cared. Outside, snow fell like forgiveness I didn't need to earn. This Christmas Eve, nobody wished for my death. Nobody whispered cruel words while I wrapped presents. Nobody treated my kindness like weakness or my trust like stupidity. The house felt warm and full and honest. The way Christmas should feel. The way family should feel. The way the rest of my life would feel, now that I'd learned to protect what mattered most.